have in front of me is Samsung's latest and greatest flip phone, the Galaxy Z Flip 7, and right over here is Motorola's latest and greatest flip phone, the Moto Razr 60 Ultra. Now, I've been going back and forth between these two phones and figuring out which is the better flagship flip phone, and basically give you guys a definitive answer on, whether paying an extra $100 for the Razr 60 Ultra is worth it, or whether Samsung's squared off Flip 7 is just as good. So let's kick things off with its specs. The Samsung Z Flip 7 is using their own in-house Exynos 2500 chip, which might not be a fan favorite at all, but we'll get to performance differences later in the video. Besides that, this phone comes with 12 gigs of RAM, up to 512 gigs of storage, and a 4300 milliamp hour battery, which is the biggest that Samsung's ever put in a flip phone. And flipping right over to Motorola and the Razr 60 Ultra here, this phone's using the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip from Qualcomm. It has 16 gigs of RAM and can go up to 1 terabyte of storage. Now, probably the biggest difference here with the Razr 60 Ultra is the battery. Now, Moto was able to pack 400 milliamp hours more than the Flip 7, which is a pretty big battery for a flip phone. And we'll get to battery life in both of these phones later in the video. Alright, now when it comes to its displays, the Flip 7 pretty much copied the Moto Razr 60 Ultra's cover display, which they were the first ones to do the all-around display on the cover display, which also extends to the circles around the cameras. And I think both displays look awesome. The Razr 60 Ultra does have a higher resolution on both displays, but as you guys can clearly see, the Flip 7's cover display goes edge to edge with the slimmest bezels, and I actually really like this more than the Razr 60 Ultra's cover display. So we have a 4.1-inch display on the Samsung and 4-inch on the Razr. Now, in terms of design, the Flip 7 is squared off quite heavily, which matches the rest of the Galaxy phones in their lineup. It's much nicer looking and feels better in hand in my opinion. The Razr 60 Ultra is definitely not a bad looking phone either, especially when you have, different material options for the back of the phone, like this wood one that I have. But they also have one in Alcantara, which is pretty unique. Also, the sides on the Razr are much more rounded off and definitely smoother feeling, so it's really up to you whether you like, the squared off look from Samsung's Flip 7 or the rounded off design from Moto's Razr 60 Ultra. Now, in terms of cameras, there are 3 cameras in total for both phones. Both phones have a main wide camera, an ultra wide camera on the cover display, and a selfie camera on the inside. Now, what I love about the Razr's camera set for the Ultra is the fact that all cameras, including the front-facing camera on the inside, are 50 megapixels. On the Flip 7, we only have the main camera at 50 megapixels and the ultra-wide is at 12, and the front-facing on the inside is a 10 megapixel sensor. Now, I know megapixels aren't everything, but it is nice to have that triple 50 megapixel setup for a flip phone, especially the ultra-wide, so I can have more detailed looking group shots. So starting off with software, the Z Flip 7 is running Android 16, while the Razr 60 Ultra is running off of Android 15. Overall though, not much has changed in terms of, overall design and UI, but Samsung does have one UI on top of Android, and Moto's got their own flavor of UI on top of Android. But in general though, I personally like One UI better. I personally feel like it has more features for power users, and it also offers pretty good customization with its stock launcher, and it also comes with very little to no bloatware. The Razr 60 Ultra, on the other hand, also offers one of the simplest looking skins on top of Android, but it does require to use a custom launcher to install custom icons. But if it's your first time using a Samsung or a Moto Razr, you can't really go wrong with either one. Both perform pretty much the same. Now, both phones also have access to Google's Gemini, but to Moto's credit, it also has access to a bunch of other services like Microsoft's Copilot, it has Perplexity, and of course, Google Gemini. So if you're big into AI, Moto's Razr 60 Ultra might be the better phone here, since all 3 integrate system-wide on the Razr, and you even get a dedicated button on the left side of the phone, which launches Moto AI. Now, the Flip 7 may not have an extra button for AI, but it does now have Samsung DeX for the very first time. Now, if you don't know what DeX is about, you can basically plug in your Flip 7 to a monitor, and your Flip 7 can turn into a pocketable PC, which is kind of insane. There's a ton of videos on Samsung DeX already, so if you want to learn more about Samsung DeX, definitely watch some videos on it on YouTube, because it's kind of sick. Now, probably the biggest change between these two phones though is how you use the cover display. with Moto and its cover display, you don't really need to install third-party apps or anything like that, just to use whatever apps that you have installed. So if you want to run, COD Mobile or Genshin Impact on your cover display, you can do that right away. On the Flip7, Samsung really wants to make sure that you get the best experience, so it's a little bit more grounded, a little bit more strict on what apps you can run on the cover display, and you'd also have to download an app called Good Lock from the Galaxy Store just to enable more apps on the cover display. So yeah, I feel like the Razr is just easier to navigate and get things to work out of the box, and it feels like a proper home screen. And with the Flip7, there's just, extra apps that you got to download first before you can even launch any app that you want on the cover display. Now, in terms of performance and battery life, I actually noticed that the Razr has the edge here, with the phone lasting up to 2 hours more than the Flip, and it also has a way faster charging rate than the Flip7. So we get up to 68 watts of charging on the Razr 60 Ultra and 25 watts for the Flip7. And what that means is that you can fast charge your Razr to 100% in about 45 minutes, while the Flip7 can take about an hour and a half. Now, if battery life means a lot to you, then the Razr 60 Ultra might be the phone for you, but don't count out the Flip7 just yet. And then we have the Exynos 2500 versus Snapdragon 8 Elite. I think both phones performed really well. In terms of day-to-day usage, they're about the same. No lags, no stutters, or any app crashes from what I've experienced. In terms of numbers though, the Razr 60 Ultra with the Snapdragon chip is faster than the Exynos 2500 on the Flip7. But in reality, you won't really notice that the Flip7 is that much slower when you're just, browsing the web, watching videos on YouTube, or messaging your friends. Where you will probably see a difference is how quickly your phone will throttle and how warm they get. I did notice that both phones get extremely warm when playing games for more than 30 minutes, especially the Razr 60 Ultra. Since the 8 Elite chip is known to get extremely warm when under heavy load, it tends to throttle the Razr a lot quicker than the Flip7. And to be honest, that makes sense. Both of these phones are pretty thin, which means they don't really have the same kind of cooling or vapor chamber that regular phones have. And even regular phones get warm when you're playing games. So don't be alarmed when you feel the phone get warm to the touch. It's completely normal. Okay, so it's time for the camera comparison. Now, I did go over the camera specs earlier in the video, but specs are just specs at the end of the day. So how did these two perform, and which one do I personally like better? So let's kick things off with the photos. Now, with the main wide camera at 1x or 2x, both cameras I think do an excellent job when there's plenty of light on the scene. If you're outside on a sunny day, I think it's a tie. It just really depends on what kind of look that you're after. The Razr is noticeably more contrasty than the Flip7, while the Flip7, in my opinion, looks a lot closer than what you get to an iPhone, meaning it's not as contrasty, the colors are pretty natural and not super saturated, and the Razr is a lot punchier with a bit more saturation. Personally, I think the Razr looks a little bit better here, but you might like how the Samsung looks more. Jumping onto the ultra wide, which is 0.6x on the Flip7 and 0.5x on the Razr 60 Ultra. And as you guys can see, the Razr 60 Ultra is just ever so slightly wider here, but it's also the same when it comes to its overall look. Now, just like the main camera, the photos out of the ultra wide camera looks a lot punchier. There's, a little bit more contrast here and slightly more saturation, almost like you don't really need to edit the photos before posting them on social. The Flip7, on the other hand, is still somewhat more muted, more lifelike. And again, I hate to say it, but it's looking a lot like an iPhone, where it needs just a tiny bit of tweaking in the overall image before posting it on social. Now again, you might like how this looks, but personally, I think the Razr 60 Ultra looks just a little bit better here. Now, when it comes to its videos, both have camcorder modes and both can record up to 4K 60 using the cover display. And honestly, it's mostly up to the ISP on these chips on how, videos are being processed. But let me know in the comments down below which phone you think looks better, and also which phone has a better mic for videos. Okay, so this is the video on the Z Flip 7. We're recording with the cover display at ultra wide at 4K 30. Let me know what you guys think of the video quality and how it compares to the Moto 60 Ultra. And let me know what the microphone sounds like as well. And this is the Razr 60 Ultra recording with the ultra wide lens as well. We're shooting at 4K 30, and let me know what you guys think of the video quality, but also how the microphone sounds and how it compares to this Z Flip 7. Now, one big advantage the Flip7 does have over the 60 Ultra here is the fact that you can shoot log videos. Now, as someone who shoots log videos and loves to color grade, this is an instant win for me. It just gives me more flexibility when color grading, which is really nice to see on a flip phone. And as you can see from the video right now, we're shooting at log and then we're gonna color grade it, and this is what it looks like. So yeah, when it comes to photos, I personally prefer the Razr 60 Ultra, but when it comes to videos, I think the Flip7 is just a much better video camera overall. Now, I know that there's not a lot of people out here buying these phones outright, and you're most likely going to trade in your old phone and get a discount, or you'll have to pay every single month for 24 months or something like that. And if I was to spend $50-ish on a brand new phone, which is what T-Mobile says it costs without their promotion, I would most likely pick the Galaxy Z Flip 7 for two reasons, and hear me out on this one. First off is the software. Now, Samsung is known to push out updates a lot faster than Motorola. The Flip 7s also promise to get 7 years of software updates and security updates, which is pretty long for a smartphone. Also, I personally prefer One UI over Moto's vanilla Android experience. I personally don't need 3 different AI assistants on a phone and a dedicated button at that. And the second thing is the fact that the Flip 7 is a lot more accessible. And this goes for how much it'll cost, what accessories are available, and repairability. More often than not, you'll be able to buy the Flip 7 a lot cheaper than the Razr 60 Ultra. And you'll also find more accessories available for the Flip 7. And of course, if you're in one of the US cities that have physical Samsung stores, like New York, for example, you can get your phone fixed or have someone take a look at your phone and get a replacement pretty quickly and pretty easily. And even if you go through a third-party shop, they'll most likely carry more Samsung parts than Motorola, sadly. So yeah, if I was to choose between these two phones, I personally think the Galaxy Z Flip 7 is the better buy here.